Um, so we're going to start by just reading that portion of John 2, and then we'll move on and talk about the actual event. So after this, and I mentioned this to you yesterday, there's some indeterminate amount of time between the wedding to Cana and this event. We don't know exactly how long. We do know that it's springtime. That's what we know. Bless you. So after this, he, meaning Jesus, went down to Capernaum with his mother and with his brothers and his disciples, and they stayed there for a few days. The Passover of the Jews was at hand, soon, and Jesus went up to Jerusalem. In the temple, he found those who were selling oxen and sheep and pigeons, and the money changers sitting there. And making a whip of cords, he drove all of them out of the temple with the sheep and the oxen, and he poured out the coins of the money changers and overturned their tables. And he told those who sold the pigeons, "Take these things away, do not make my Father's house a house of trade." His disciples remembered that it was written, "Zeal for your house will consume you." So the Jews said to him, What sign do you show us for doing these things?" Jesus answered them, "Destroy this temple, and in 3 days I will raise it up." The Jews then said, "It has taken 46 years to build this temple, and will you raise it up in 3 days?" But Jesus was speaking about the temple of his body. When therefore he was raised from the dead, his disciples remembered that he said this, and they believed him. But they believed the scripture and the word that Jesus had spoken. Now, when he was in Jerusalem at the Passover feast, many believed in his name, but when they saw the signs he was doing. Remember, signs means miracles. But Jesus, on his part, did not entrust himself to them, because he knew all people and needed no one to bear witness about man, for he himself knew what was in man. So, that should be it. So this is sometime after the wedding at Cana, as I said, and it's near the time of Passover. It's interesting that it says that Jesus went down. Jesus went down. Hang on, So he went down to Capernaum. I think I have a map here. Yeah. So where is from where he was to Capernaum? What direction? So he was up in Galilee, right? In Cana of Galilee. So what direction is Capernaum from Cana? Northeast, right? And usually we say, except for my daughter, she always says up. We went up to Texas. We went down. Anyway. So we usually say to go down is to go south, and to go up is to go north. But they chose up and down more based on, in ancient times, more based on elevation. And Capernaum was at a higher elevation than Cana. So that's why Jesus went up to Capernaum. By the way, no matter where you're going or coming from in Israel, you always go up to Jerusalem. Always. And from anywhere else, you're going up to Jerusalem. You are generally going up in elevation as well, but there's that second idea of this is the Holy City. Anyway, that's just your little thing. So Capernaum that literally means village of Nahum. And if Nahum may have lived there, I don't know, but that's the meaning of it. And it became, and you need to remember this, it became the earthly headquarters of Jesus. When Jesus had downtime, when Jesus wasn't traveling, he went back to Capernaum, specifically to Peter's house. And where Peter's, I think it was Peter's, but and that's where he would stay when he was at home. So Capernaum became his earthly headquarters. And we're not told how long he was there this time. We're told that he went to Jerusalem after that. And the synoptics don't give us much information about how in what's happening in John 2, how long he was there. Now, you see that picture there? You're going to see it again. That is in Capernaum. And you can see that Capernaum is right on the northwest side of the Sea of Galilee. This is the synagogue in Capernaum. Now, this particular synagogue was probably not there at Jesus' time. But there was a synagogue there, and I'll show you more about that in a little bit. This is the ruins of the synagogue at Capernaum. This is Capernaum right here. This is the village of Capernaum. And you can see there the synagogue, and you can see some other buildings there as well. I want you to remember what was said in the video of Ray Vander Laan, where he said that there was this communal, like it wasn't, this is my house, and this is your house, and then this is your house, and then this is, it was a communal living situation. So there would have been a number of generations under that roof. How do they know that? Now, we don't know. This is likely the remains of Peter's house. Anybody else? How do they know that? Because from very ancient times, there are etchings that this was a place of worship. And it's the only place. It makes sense that was where Jesus stayed, or where Jesus stayed was Peter's house. Yeah, that's the remains of Peter's house in Capernaum. And the Passover of the, oh, I know I had more. So then I'm going to go back. Underneath this synagogue is the ruins of, remember how Ray Vander Laan talked about they would build, and then somebody would come and sack it, and they'd build on top of that, and then somebody come and so, and those tells are just layers of societies. Underneath this is the synagogue that was destroyed, and it's made of black basalt rock. That's this kind of rock you don't find near Capernaum. This was hauled in, but the rocks around the Sea of Galilee, the north part of the Sea of Galilee, are black basalt, and underneath this is the ruins of the earlier synagogue made of black basalt. That's where Jesus. That's the synagogue of Jesus. But it would have been right here on this ground. So the Jewish Passover is at hand, and so it is spring. It is late March, early April. Kind of like our Easter, when we have Easter, is based on Passover, right? Because Jesus' death and resurrection happened during Passover. And so we've got, we've got this calendar that goes by that. And so Easter it's not like Christmas. It's always December 25th. It is a different Sunday every year. Well, Passover moves within that range of March to April as well. And that makes sense. Jesus died, during that time. And only John tells us about this particular Passover, the first Passover of his ministry. The Synoptics don't tell us anything about this. They don't speak of the cleansing of the temple. They do speak of the cleansing of the temple, but they put it closer to the resurrection. Now, so what are we to make of that? That in John, Jesus cleansed the temple early. In Matthew, Mark, and Luke, he cleansed it late. There are 3 choices. Either John or the Synoptics got it wrong. I don't think that's good. Or there were 2 cleansings. He cleansed the temple early and he cleansed the temple late. And that's a possibility, absolutely possible. And I have a book over there I want to look at and see what they think about it, but I know what scholars I've read say about it. Or, and when I say this, okay, when I say this, some of y'all are going to go, and it's just going to kind of hit you wrong. But you hear me out, okay? John moved it for humanity. Now, when we think of that, we say, no, the Bible's inerrant, and that would be an error, and that wouldn't be, it wouldn't be true, and it's a lie, and we get all bunched up. In ancient times, see, we are Greek thinkers. We think linearly, and then this happened, and this happened, and this happened, and you're not going to stop talking about something that happened in 2013, because we're talking about stuff that's happening in 2022. Throw that in there, that doesn't make sense. But Jewish thinking is more Eastern. It's more holistic. And time is not as important. I've been to Eastern countries. I've been to places like Africa. And this is true in Latin American countries too. Time is a really relative thing. At my sister's church, church starts when everybody gets in. And it often starts very, very late. Does anybody have a church like that? Like it's not about time. We gotta start at 10. We're starting at 10 whether you're there or not. That's a very white American thing. I just gotta tell you, it is a very white American thing. But that's not true all around the world. And so they don't think in terms of chronology. John wouldn't have been thinking in terms of chronology. Now, why would he move it? I don't know. But here's the thing. I don't have a problem with him doing that because in his day, that wouldn't have been seen as being false. Does that make sense? So one of those is true. Either there were two cleansings or John moved it for grammatic reasons. I don't know which it is, but as C.S. Lewis says, the first thing we're going to say when we have it is, of course. We won't even have to ask the question. We'll already know it. But we'll probably have to. So let's talk then about the time of the event. The Passover of the Jews was at hand, and Jesus went up to Jerusalem. So it's now around the Passover time, and let's talk a little bit about the Passover. The Passover reminds us, it reminds us about the Egyptian captivity of the Israelites and their release. You remember that God called Moses to a burning tree, and Moses argued with God and said, nope, I'm not doing it. And finally, he gives in to God. Look, I'm just going to give you a little bit of advice here based on Moses. If God tells you to do something, just do it. If God, just give up. Just do what he says. It works better that way. Same with Mrs. Schroeder. You're going to end up doing it. Why fight? Moses argued with God and ended up going anyway. God brings this series of plagues to Egypt. Every time Moses went into Pharaoh and said, let my people go, and he said, no, there was a plague. Let my people go, no. There was a plague. And at some point it was, let my people go, and he goes, okay, no, I changed my mind. And that happened a couple times too. But finally, after the 9th plague, the final plague, which was the death of the firstborn, Pharaoh allowed the people to go. That you know the story. Each household was to get a lamb and take the blood of the lamb and put it over the doorposts of their household, and the angel of death would pass over. That's where Passover comes from. Would pass over those homes and only kill the firstborn of those who did not have that. And so this is celebrated to today. And at that time, on the 14th day of the month of Nadar, the family killed a lamb and sprinkled the blood on the doorposts, the top and the side, and they roasted the lamb and they ate it. And they ate unleavened bread because they didn't have time for their bread to rise, and they ate while wearing traveling clothes because they knew after this happened, they were going to have to peace out really, really quickly. And that today is called the Seder Feast. And they still celebrate that. And God said, we will celebrate this in perpetuity, forever. And they still do. Jews still do celebrate this every year.
If you, like, for example, if you couldn't get your hands on a lamb, could you, like, stay the night at your friend's house because their door is covered, and then you would be covered too?
I don't know that. I mean, they live in communities, so there might have been multiple households under one roof anyway. But
Like you're good too.
But I'm sure they would have found a way to that household.
Okay, you can just
Yeah.
Because you don't need that much blood.
So so that was the original Passover, and as I said, it's been celebrated ever since. And the reason they celebrate it even today is to remind the Jews or the Israelites of their Egyptian captivity and release, and to remind them who it was exactly that released them from that captivity. It was not themselves. They were not powerful. God did that. God kept them safe in the wilderness. God parted the waters. It was all God. And guess what? Yes.
If you're Israeli but not, like if you're Hebrew descent but you're not Jewish, would you still celebrate it?
No, only Jews. So it was to be an annual event. So yearly, God told them that at the end of March or the beginning of April. And the Jews celebrate that Passover as God commanded through Moses. Now, the evening after Passover, so day goes in Jewish. A Jewish day is from. Sometimes I get this back. Sundown to sunset. Sundown to sunset. So the next day begins at sundown. That's why the Sabbath begins at sundown. Even if it's not technically, AM yet. So the night after that Sunday feast, at sundown at the end of that day, is called the Feast of Unleavened Bread. Anybody know why it's called the Feast of Unleavened Bread? Yeah. Yep. Leavening, yeast or something like that. And here's the thing, God commanded that of them. He said, get rid of anything that is leaven. And I would say probably more Orthodox Jews still do this. They would not only throw out and get it out of the house and away from the house in the trash. They swept out the whole house. They swept just in case there was some little bit of yeast, hiding on the floor. They swept out the whole house. And so that 7 days is the Feast of Unleavened Bread. Why? What was wrong with unleavened bread? Why would they do that? Anybody know? You know how there's some things that you see or you hear that bring back a memory? God was wanting you to remember. Do you know that the most repeated commandment in the Bible And so that cleaning out of the leaven was to remember. Why? Because they had to leave so quickly, they didn't have time to let their bread rise. They had to eat unleavened bread. And so now, or since then, there to be nothing made with leaven. I messed up one year. That was the student council sponsor. And we periodically had bagel sales, and we got them. I'm not going to name. I'm not going to name the establishment. I got it. This is years ago. And I was selling bagels. So that whole 8 days is now kind of called the Passover. It's technically the Passover, 1 day, feast of unleavened bread, 7 days, but the whole thing's called the Passover. And during that time, I had the bagels. I made a T-shirt, and I didn't want to. I was a poor religious. I made her really angry. But they're not supposed to, according to the law. So the reason they had unleavened bread is because they had to get out of Dodge, and they didn't have time for the bread to rise. And that's how that whole unleavened bread thing came to be associated with the Passover. And today, most Jews just call that whole 8 days the Passover. Though technically it's the Passover, but it's just kind of called Passover. Now, John calls this the Jews' Passover in verse 13, which is an interesting thing to say because in Exodus 12, it says, it's called, I thought I had Exodus 12. It is called, when it is initiated, God calls it the Lord's Passover. It will be holy to you because it is the Lord's Passover. And John calls it the Jews' Passover. Why would John call it the Jews' Passover?
Yeah, because the Jews wanted it.
Yeah, I think that's possible, right? I mean, it may just be incidental, maybe, but it may be intentional. And the point he would be making is that the Passover had degenerated from what God intended it to be originally through the centuries, and now they're calling it the Jews' Passover. The Jews didn't pass over. God did that. And so the degeneration of Passover can further be seen, and one sort of corroborating evidence that John is denigrating the Jews in the Jewish leadership in this is seen in the commercialism within the Temple Mount, and how far that is from a religious, from a sacred celebration. And so at the time of Passover, the head of the family, of every family, had to sacrifice, make a sacrifice during the Passover. Generally a lamb, but there were other goats and other animals that could be, but every family had to do that. And that was required. But not everybody coming to the Passover lived in Jerusalem. Jesus didn't live in Jerusalem. He came a long way. So people were coming from all over Israel to celebrate the Passover, and they'd have to bring their sheep with them, and they'd have to bring their stuff with them. And so the practice arose to make it easier for people. Just bring your family. We got everything else you need. You don't have the right coinage, we can change that. We will sell you your goat. We'll sell you your Passover lamb right here. And it was convenient. So we don't do it anymore because my sister's working in Switzerland. And hopefully when they move back to Kansas City, we'll continue. But since my mother died, my dad died before my mom, our family, almost our whole family, and some years our entire family, and it's a huge family, met at my sister's house. And there was a division of labor. And my part of the division of labor was very specific. I made the from scratch. I made the from scratch pecan and I made extraordinarily delicious and I had to have everybody. I don't use no Aunt Jemima stuff. I'm talking flour, buttermilk. I'm making. My kids used to get angry. Why can't we have cereal? We want cereal. I'm like, I made them a fresh breakfast every single day. Every single day. Eggs, omelets, waffles from scratch, pancakes from scratch. And they grew up and they're like, that's right. They're like, we want Lucky Charms. I'm like, no, we got good Lucky Charms. Anyway, I digress. So I had, and I also brought the roaster. So the back of my car was full of stuff, and I had to go shopping for everything and get everything and all that, and put all that in my car. And I had to remember how many pie plates I brought in the first place, so I got them all back, and all, you know, and I was cooking for anywhere from 25 to 30 people. So this is not a small gathering. And it was hard, and it would have been really helpful if it was all just there for me. Like if all I had to do was drive down to Kansas City, and then look, poof, it's there. Well, so yeah, it would be great to go to Jerusalem and have your lamb there instead of bringing the kids and the lamb. And the lamb goes, you know, I don't want to do this. Especially when he's getting close to the temple. I'm sure he's smelling the other dead lambs going on. Not doing that. So that's how the practice arose. That they would sell animals and exchange money for the pilgrims. And it began on the walls outside. Let's look at the temple. It began on the walls and the streets outside of the temple, which wasn't problematic. But for reasons I can't tell you, at some point it moved inside the Temple Mount itself. So we need to talk a little bit about the Temple Mount so that you understand what it is you're looking at. But as is often the case when the government gets involved, things get more complicated, right? What could be easy now becomes like a 50-page bill or a 100-page bill or something like that. And so you begin to have people gouging people like, well I'm not just going to exchange you a shekel for a whatever it is, a Roman coin or whatever. You got to give me interest. Okay, well, you know, that lamb, if you would have bought it at home, is 50 shekels, you got to pay me. Because isn't that true that convenience comes at a price? Convenience comes at a price. And so that happened in the temple as well. And people were using unfair practices in their selling. The prices were artificially inflated. We see that today too, right? If there's, I remember when Game Boy, and you could not find a Game Boy, and if you did find a Game Boy, that thing was going to be way too expensive. And that this is a perfectly perfect setup. So I used to teach supply and local demand, and I could never get the kids to understand. They always said, when the supply goes up, the cost goes down. When the cost goes up, no, that's not it. It's if supply is greater than demand. So if they make more of it than they need. If demand is greater than supply. And so that was the case here. Demand was greater than supply. So what I want you to kind of picture in this, having in the big court there, having the sellers and all the lambs and chickens and whatever else they had in there, and money changing. I want you to think of, get in your head, get Black Friday. In your head. Everybody got a picture of Black Friday in your head? By the way, I got that Game Boy because my sister saw the last one. She picked it up. She's not an athlete. She threw it right to me. Anyway, okay, so you got Black Friday in your head, right? I picture it in the sanctuary.
Oh no. That makes me uncomfortable.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. That's exactly what it was. Made Jesus a little uncomfortable too. So yeah, I think we have just enough time to talk a little bit about the temple itself. I want to give you a visual. So that's kind of the place where it started. But you see, this is the whole Temple Mount, that outer wall. Now, the only part that is like the temple, this part is the temple, the actual temple, the outer, not the outer court, this is the outer court really, but and then the holy place and the most holy. This is the most holy place. But all of this was called the temple. Okay, all of it was called the temple. Technically, this enclosed part. This is the court of the Gentiles. Anyone could go in there if they were a man. But then to get past this, you had to be a Jew. And here's where the sacrifices were taking place. So holy place, most holy place. So inner court, holy place, most holy place. So there would have been a lot of people in there. It would have been very crowded. It's a huge area, by the way. And then that is an average sized church. What does it say? It holds about 400 people comfortably. So you're getting an idea of how big that is? Yeah. And then it was surrounded by these colonnades, by these porches, covered porches, where people walked and talked. And there'll be a time in John where Jesus is teaching on Solomon's porch, and it's surrounded by those porches. And then they had these huge colonnades, these huge columns. To give you an idea, this is a man. This is a regular sized man. Can you see him? It's hard to see, I know, but he's just this big, and those are the columns. So this is a huge, massive, stately temple mount, and oftentimes they gather under those porches when the weather was bad. So hundreds, maybe thousands of Jews and Gentiles and visitors would have witnessed this event of Jesus cleansing the temple. So we're going to stop there, and we'll pick up here tomorrow. I want to tell you one last thing. On Friday, I'm going to give you time to work on your tomorrow we'll finish. We'll hopefully finish. It's a longer.